Hey everybody, and welcome to Epic Everyday, our weekday podcast for busy, stressed out Christians who want to do more than just survive. I'm Liz Ferricks, and this is my husband Evan.
Good morning.
And we're so glad you guys are here with us on this wonderful Wednesday. Since it's Wednesday, we are going to talk about being centered, which is living out of the essence of who God has designed us to be. And this week, we're talking about faithfulness. So we thought we'd talk about acting according to faithfulness.
The first thing I thought of when we were thinking about this topic was all the just amazing stories from the Bible of people who've been faithful in their lives and the different ways that it talks about that. You know, Hebrews 11 is this passage of this guy did this in faith and he did that in faith.
I really like the people that are in Hebrews 11 are sometimes not the people you would expect to be there.
Uh-huh.
You know, I mean, the things that they did were faithful, like Abraham. You know, he was a friend of God, and yet he kind of throws Sarah under the bus there a couple times. Sure. And
yeah, if you just read Hebrews 11, it's kind of a highlight reel. But if you go back and look at the more of the history books in the Old Testament, it's kind of like, whoa. I mean, I think that's the amazing thing about the Bible, and I guess life in general. Everybody who you would think of as a saint, whether it's from the Bible or from history, you know, is got some major problems.
Yeah, I mean, Moses and David murdered someone. I mean, there are lists there that are like, man.
Yeah. But and yet when God is thinking of them, evidently he's thinking about their faithfulness and not their sin. I mean, God's the only one that can do that.
That's
what an amazing thing. Yeah. So I guess kind of the problem with this topic, you know, we usually try to talk about a problem and then the solution is, I think some people become Christians by faith. Like we understand how that works, but then it's like, then what?
Right.
What else am I supposed to be doing by faith? And trying to figure that out is kind of this lifelong process. I mean, and that's the journey, right? But I think, I don't know, do you think some Christians are content to get salvation and then they kind of go back to normal life stuff, and maybe they're just like a better version of what they were before, and they're not really, you know, diving deep into the what do I do by faith day by day? Yeah,
I'd say we have some personal experience with people like that. It's sad that some people kind of just stay in the same place that they were. Mm-hmm. But I think it goes back to, at least for a lot of people, that, you know, the Peter Cesaro stuff, the emotionally healthy spirituality. You can't have healthy spirituality if you can't be healthy emotionally. And that's part of faithfulness, is working through our emotional baggage, because everybody's got baggage, regardless of, you know, you could have the best childhood of anybody that's alive today, and you still would have had sinful parents. You still would have had sinful people in your life.
Yeah.
You know, you still would have some things to work through.
Yeah. So at the end of that hall of faith in Hebrews, there's a really compelling verse. Actually, it's at the kind of the beginning here. It's verse 6. It says, "Now, without faith it is impossible to please God, for whoever comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who diligently search for him." And that's from the ISV. I think we get confused about what this diligently search for him activity is like. I think we can too easily fall into this idea that, oh, I know what I'm supposed to be doing for God, right? I'm supposed to be, maybe it's great stuff. I'm supposed to be opening orphanages. I'm supposed to be feeding the homeless every Saturday. Like, I'm doing all this stuff for God.
Right.
Whereas I think when we diligently seek him in our hearts and do the intentional living stuff that we talk about often on the show, and the self-examine life stuff, and then working out some of this Peter Cesaro emotional, healthy spirituality stuff, like that is way harder, I think, than feeding the homeless and opening orphanages, because it is like, it rips you apart and then it puts you back together. And then you go into the world and you can do some of this stuff. You could build an ark like Noah did. You could rescue a nation like Moses did. I mean, because God is able to use you because you're connected to him.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading this quote this morning. It's out of Priscilla Shires' Breathe, which is a Bible study on the Sabbath. And she quotes, think it's Charles Swinson. She says, or he says, God does not have to depend on human exhaustion to get his work done. God is not so desperate for resources to accomplish his purposes that we have to abandon the raising of our children in order to accommodate him. God is not so despairing of where to turn next that he has to ask us to go without sleep 5 nights in a row.
Oh, man.
Chronic overloading is not a spiritual prerequisite for authentic Christianity. Quite the contrary. Overloading is often what we do when we forget who God is. And
that's good.
Yeah, I think that's, like you're saying, we focus on doing things for God instead of searching after God and pursuing him. And when we do that, we get into that place of like overwhelm, where it's just, we're so busy, there's no margin, and there's really no room to seek God. And so even though that might look like faithfulness, it's really not.
Right. We talk about the CSCs, and diligently doing the CSCs, you'll be diligently seeking God. And that's the work of the heart, and it's the work of changing and maturing as a person, spiritually and emotionally and physically. Like it encompasses everything, and that's the hard work of the gospel and of sanctification. It's such a different way of thinking about things, because sometimes it doesn't look productive to be doing the CSCs, and
it's an internal art form.
Yeah.
So people might not see it on the outside.
And like, say, if you were really good at Tai Chi and you didn't slip on the ice, you just are walking down the street and it doesn't look like you're doing anything.
Right.
But because you're not falling down. And how amazing is that? Right? Like, there's just these subtle things that make the Christian spiritual life so rich. Whereas without it, we're slipping, sliding all over the place, and we're crashing into mailboxes and falling down in the street.
Right. Yeah, I wrote down, when we have a motivation of trusting in God's ways of doing things rather than trying to make it look pretty on the outside, that's when we're faithful, because otherwise we fall into kind of the Pharisees' trap, that idea of trying to follow the law in every tiny little detail, but not following it in your heart.
And how awful would that be to live like that? And we know Christians who live like that. I mean, I think we all do. It's so easy to turn into a legalist.
It is, because those are the things that can be measured. The things like the CSCs, the things like true faithfulness, those things can't be measured.
This made me think of the story about Jesus walking on the water and then Peter wanting to walk on the water.
Uh-huh.
And how, our faith isn't about walking on the water. It's about abiding and keeping our eyes on Jesus.
Right.
And that's such a powerful illustration of that. Like, you will walk on water if you have your eyes on Jesus, but that's not what it's about.
Right.
And if we start to think, well, my ministry needs to look a certain way, or, my life needs to look a certain way, my kids need to behave a certain way. When we surrender and we're like, okay, God, what is this? I think I know what's right and good, but God might have something else in mind.
Right.
And we might have to unlearn some of these cultural things that are not actually that great,
Yeah.
as far as, especially when it comes to like, wow, what's a well-behaved kid? And, what's the right career path? And what do men do? What do women do?
Right.
And our culture is telling us all this stuff that we've got to unlearn.
Yeah.
And that comes from our heart again.
Right. Yeah, it's doing that internal work first, so that then out of that internal work, it gives you a foundation to express faithfulness externally.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the internal stuff down, you can do the external all day long and you're never going to actually attain faithfulness.
Yeah, it's just such an interesting and counterintuitive tool belt, especially for fast-paced American culture.
Oh, yeah.
The tools are slowing down, reflection, meditation, gratitude lists, getting out of our comfort zone, which so much of our life is about maintaining a certain level of comfort, right? It's too easy to think, well, being a Christian means selling everything and moving to Africa. And some people get called to do that. We've got some friends that did that. But it's not about not doing nothing and being a couch potato either. Like, once you got your salvation in the bag, you're good to go.
But it's also not about, okay, now I'm going to go ahead and keep doing the same job that I've got and take my kids to their soccer games and yada, yada, the whole 9 yards, and never once pursue God in the middle of that.
Right. And it could be you do the self-inspection, you pursue God, and
Nothing changes on the outside.
It could be, but you're more intentional about it. I mean, because having kids, I mean, that's a lifelong commitment, but it's also, they're not babies and they're not teenagers forever. Like, and it's good, I think, to be hyper-focused on what's going on with them. But then once they're adults, you don't have to change diapers for more than a couple of years,
Per kid.
Yeah. It depends on how you stagger it, I guess.
Yeah.
So we're constantly being drawn down the path, and God is causing us to grow. And that's his faithfulness, and our faithfulness looks like abiding and following him and being good sheep. You can't leave it up to someone else to tell you if you're being faithful either, because it might look like going to soccer games and building relationships with the parents of the kids,
right?
And who knows, like, your calling, answer it, whatever it is. I'm not going to be able to tell you what that is.
And if somebody tells you it's a bad calling, but you know that that's what God's called you to do it anyway. There's a reason Jesus says that whoever, doesn't hate his father and mother and brother and leave everything for the sake of the gospel. That's what we're called to do. Not to be like, oh, I hate you, family member, but to follow God past whatever they say. So even if your family or your friends are like, this is insane, what are you doing? I mean, there's a balance there, because we do want to listen if our family and friends are like, okay, I really do not think you're following God here.
Yeah. But
if we do the work of, praying through that, searching the scriptures, and we still come up with, nope, this is what I'm supposed to do, go for it.
But do that investigation and that praying and get out of your comfort zone, step out in faith.
All right, well, hopefully that gives us all some stuff to work on. I know I always need to work on all the internal stuff. Never really ends.
No.
Just hopefully you get a little bit better, all the time. As always, pick whether today is going to be awesome or not, whether you're going to strengthen those neural pathways to look for good things. We love you guys, and we're praying for you. Thanks to everybody that's been listening to the show and sharing the show. We really appreciate it. If you have found this podcast helpful, please do continue to share it. Come back tomorrow, and since it's Thursday, we're going to talk about being connected and how to be faithful in relationships.
Yeah, can't wait. Talk to you then.
Have an awesome Wednesday.